Hello. I want to go over the deductive reasoning packet with you. The reason you want to have done this is so that you can practice and hopefully unstick some misunderstandings you might have regarding determining the validity of deductive arguments. The reason you want to do that is that some of these exact sorts of items will be on the final, and you might want to address in discussing logic, is there some deduction going on if it's valid? There might be a sentence or two in the critical analysis, but actually in the writing of the critical analysis, the more important logical elements to look at would be to look at the inductive reasoning going on. That makes up the bulk of most writing and thinking. Again, we understand by looking at evidence and then making a generalization. And that is how we come up with scientific theories. So that, for the purpose of looking at the articles, is more important. Deduction is important for us to understand because while we understand using induction, we tend to make decisions based on deductive process. So it all is important, but I'll guide you through this. I suggested on this first part, which is true-false, not that you simply go through and answer true-false, but that you use the book resource, that you instead look at the book and use it to answer so that you're not guessing, but actually having a pretty good idea of what's going on. So let's look at the book, this particular page, and I will be giving you the answers to the questions 1 through 10 in the first part, true, false to make you think. 1A, a sound argument is a valid deductive argument with true premises. That is this column right here answered that question for you. So it's true. 2 is also true. A deductive argument can be valid and unsound. So we have that, it's true. We have a sound argument, it's all true and logical. A deductive argument can be valid and unsound. This is valid. It's logical, but not true, fortunately. I'm so glad of that. I can't imagine having to deal with cars transforming into airplanes. It's bad enough having people on one plane than to have them above you and below you. So this is an unsound valid argument. Sound, the only way it's sound is if it's valid, good logic, and it's true. All the premises and conclusion are true. Here, too much of this is just bad, but it is good thinking. It's valid thinking. 3, all valid deductive arguments are sound arguments. That's not true because this is valid and not sound. 4, a deductive argument can be valid or invalid and have true premises. So this is invalid and everything in here is true, but it's just not logical. Again, I explained, we know that this isn't valid because these deductive arguments we use to decide. If this was a valid argument, we could plug in anybody who campaigned hard and get the same answer, that they would be elected, but we can't do that. It's just simply not true, even though or it could be true. Here we're lucky with Barack Obama, it was true, but it is invalid and yet true. 5, when the conclusion is true, the argument must be sound. That's false for the same reason. This is not a sound argument because it's not valid, even though it happens to be true. 6, when the premises of an argument are true, the conclusion is always true as well. That's false. 7, deductive argument is sound, the conclusion must be true. Again, this is what you want right here in this column. 8, a deductive argument could have a false premise and still be sound. That's absolutely false. The only way it can be sound is if everything is true and everything is logical. 9, in a valid deductive argument, the conclusion could be true or false. Okay, so that's true. This conclusion is false, but it's a valid argument. That's 9, it's true. 10 is true. An inductive argument, an inductive valid, one more time. 10, an invalid deductive argument could have all true statements in it. That's totally true. because that takes place here. Hopefully that helped some. Let's go back to the sheet and look at what was going on with that. We're now in part 2. Here you simply had to determine, is it valid or not. Number 1, believe it or not, is valid. All dogs can fly. So you could say that, okay, all dogs can fly. Anything that can fly can swim, so all dogs can swim. That's valid. You could put it this way. If it's a dog, it can fly, or anything that can fly can swim. That is the major premise, actually. If it can fly, it can swim. Dogs can fly. We know that's not true, but we're not asking if it's true. We're asking if it's valid, so therefore it can swim based on the logic. No, I just wanted to explain that because that might have tripped you up. Generally, I won't spend a lot of time with what's valid, but more with invalid. 2 is valid, and I'm hoping you can just see that, and I'll leave that alone. 3 is invalid. There is a conditional statement. If there's life on Pluto, Pluto contains water. Here, we're looking, there is no life on Pluto, therefore it does not contain water. It's invalid. We're denying the antecedent. 4 is valid. If a condition, if it's possible, we'd have lots of time travel visitors. We have no such visitors, so time travel is not possible. That's valid. And we're going to assume it's true, but if you really think about it, it gets a little wonky. If it were possible, if somebody actually were so advanced to be time traveling, again, 4, it's valid. We'll just leave it at that. And I think we can assume it's true. But hey, if somebody had mastered time travel, they're more advanced than we are, and they're smarter than we are. And if I was from the 29th century, I wouldn't let everybody know. I could be from the 29th century. You'd never know it. And because I'm so advanced, I wouldn't tip you off, because I know if I let you know I'm from the future, you might ask me to pick your lottery numbers for you or something. So I'm not going to do that. 5 is invalid. The reason it's invalid is because it's just no certainty to that statement. We don't have enough to go on. Okay, there's no certainty. 6 is invalid. You could put it this way. If it's a living thing, consequent needs water. We're affirming the consequent here. Batteries need water, so they're living things. I think my friend Rick had been watching The Matrix when he wrote that. 7 is a similar statement, the same major premise. If it's a living thing, we could say it needs water. Okay, again, these various arguments aren't always articulated in precise syllogistic language. You have to infer it, maybe in your mind, rearrange it so it's a more proper syllogism with a more proper antidote or antecedent consequent. And so that's what I'm doing here. If it's a book, it needs, if it's a living thing, it needs water. Roses are living things, so they need water. That's valid. Number 8 is invalid. If it's a book, it has leaves. Those are what those bunches of pages are actually called. Okay. So if it's a book, it has leaves. This object has leaves, so it must be a book. We're affirming the consequent. That's invalid. Other things besides books could have leaves. Number 1 is valid. All computers are vulnerable to viruses. That's fine. 2 is invalid. If the library is open, you could check out books. You can't check out books, so the library must be closed. 3 is invalid. If a printer runs out of ink, you can't print your document. Unfortunately, you can't print, so your printer must be out of ink again. It's invalid, affirming the consequent. Number 4, people are susceptible to hindrances of critical thinking. This is all valid. I think that might be plain. 5 might blow your mind, but it's invalid. If it's nice, summer, I can go surfing. It's not nice, so then I cannot go surfing. There we're denying the antecedent. Number 6 is invalid for the opposite reason. It's affirming the consequent. I'm affirming I can go surfing, so it must be night out. There could be other reasons that you could or couldn't surf. 7 is simply no certainty. If it's a nice, I'm sorry, 7 is a large superstore is becoming more popular. The new one opening my neighborhood should do well. This is a common error where people infer that they can be deductive and they really can't. The reason we like to do that is once we get on the deductive side of logic and we're taking a generalization that's at best cogent, we can only come up with one answer to be valid. And here we can't be certain. That's why it's not valid. 8 is similarly invalid because there's no certainty. It is saying if it cuts down on illness, okay, and you refuse to use it, you'll get sick. There's no certainty to that. We can't say you'll get sick. If it were worded differently, maybe so. Number 9, all members of major religions believe in an afterlife. Giovanni is a member of a major religion. He believes in afterlife. That is valid. Number 10 is I, invalid. You could put it this way. If a person is a member of a major religion, antecedent, consequently believes in afterlife. Here we have him believing in an afterlife, which tells him he must be a member. That's affirming the consequent. And actually, that's just the way it works oftentimes. I can see I won't get through in just a few minutes. We'll have to go to 2 parts. Let's try and get through part of these anyway. Validity part 4. Okay, here you had to stipulate a little more precisely why something's invalid. Number 1 is valid, and you have to take it for what it is saying. Students who show up for classes, you can put it this way, if students show up for class, they will pass their classes. So it's valid to say they shows up for his classes and they'll pass. That's the only condition that's given. And so therefore it's valid. 2, again, it's the only condition given. Students who show up for classes will pass their classes. Amber shows up for every class but math. She will not pass all her classes. That is denying the antecedent. We're denying showing up for classes. And that's bad logic. All it's saying is that if you show up, you'll pass. It's not saying if you don't show up, you won't pass. Number 3 is valid. If you have a transition, then a detail will follow. The author used the transition, for example, a detail will follow. 4 is invalid, denying the antecedent. There could be, we're denying there's a transition, so there's no detail. That's not what it's saying. I is invalid, affirming the consequent. If you have a transition word in a sentence that signals a detail, then a detail will follow. A detail did, in fact, follow the first sentence. So 5 is invalid, affirming the consequent. Number 6 is valid. I just leave it at that. Number 7 is invalid, affirming the consequent. Okay. 8 is valid. And 9 is invalid, denying the antecedent. Okay. And we have 2 more pages, so I'm going to bail out and do this in 2 parts. Catch you in just a little bit. Bye.